This is Mr. Kalasa. I'm doing this recording because I'm not going to be able to be in class today due to a meeting, but I wanted to make sure that you guys got the lesson for today nonetheless. Um, in Chapter 4, we're going to start recording our transactions that we've learned in Chapters 2 and 3 into a document called the General Journal. And the General Journal is kind of the official diary that we're going to use to record our financial transactions for our business. In most cases, we would use the technology to record this for us in our business, but I think learning it the old paper and pencil way is a good way to learn it, because you're actually seeing what's happening through the process, whereas the computer would kind of shorten it up for us and abbreviate it for us. So I'm going to take a look at problem 4.1a in the textbook, and that's on page 107. And the transactions that we're going to look at are going to look exactly the same as they did in chapters 2 and 3. The only difference is that we're going to use this document to record them. This is kind of like the financial diary of the business, and it keeps evidence and logs all of the transactions that happen, so that if we ever need to look back, if we're ever getting audited, we have a place to go back and look and say, this is what happened on this day, this is how the transaction looked, and more importantly, here is the evidence, what we call a source document that we have that proves that this transaction actually took place. In some cases it's a check, some cases it's a receipt, sometimes it's an invoice or a bill, but the actual evidence of that document is important, so that if anybody's ever looking back at a business's finance or an organization's finance, they can see the evidence of and the paper trail of where that transaction actually took place. So let's get started with the problem. If you look at the General Journal, it's a pretty simple process here. Okay, it's going to start with a date, and the date is very important. If you ever want to look back and say what actually happened on this date, or can we, if we need to look back at a transaction that happened on a certain date, we can identify it by the date. The description is going to be a listing of the accounts that are debited and credited. We used T accounts before to identify this. This time we're just going to simply list those accounts in the description column. We're also going to include a description of the transaction. It's a summary of what actually happened, along with a source document that we could use as evidence. Post-reference column is going to be used later. After we do our transactions, we're going to post to ledgers to kind of keep balances of all the accounts, and this is going to be the number of the account that we're posting to, and then of course the debit and the credit that occurs for each account. When we journalize the transactions, we're going to put the debit of the transaction first and the credit of the transaction second. Okay, so let's get started on problem 4-1a in your textbook. The first transaction reads, Helen Kennedy on October, I'm sorry, it's the wrong one, my fault. Problem 4.1a, issued check 1169. So again, there's that evidence. It's an actual check, it's an actual check number for $2,000 to pay the September rent. All right, so in this transaction, we're going to put September 1 as the date. All right, 2019, usually we put that up there only one time, so that we know that the current year is 2019, but the dates that occur for each transaction are separate, listed separately. All right, so when we look at this transaction, issue check 1169 for $2,000 to pay September rent. This is a transaction we've seen before, and so I'm going to start out with the debit first, and the debit to this account is going to be rent expense. And some people like to actually draw the T accounts out on a separate sheet of paper. You're more than welcome to do that. For example, for this transaction here, we would simply look at drawing the T accounts again. We would have rent expense, and we would also pay cash, even though it says issued check. Check is the same as issuing cash, so I would put the debit of it's $2,000 to rent expense, and a credit to cash for $2,000, but on this particular form, we're going to write the debit in as $2,000 as a debit to rent expense, and then I'm going to indent just a little bit and write that credit in there, credit to cash for $2,000. Oh, just one more thing. In the problem, it says to use page 1 of the general journal. And that's important, again, just so we know which page to look back to if we ever need to audit our transactions. All right, so the summary or the description of this transaction is going to be very simple. Paid rent, and then we'll put check number 1169 as our piece of evidence. Okay, so again, it's just a very simple summary. So if I ever look back at this and said, I would know if I saw rent expense and cash used what was happening. But just to be sure, what actually happened, we paid the rent for September or for the previous month, and check number 1169 is the document that I hold that proves that this transaction actually happened. What I would have is a canceled check in our files that I could look at to say, okay, it was written for $2,000, it was written on September 1st, and it proves that this transaction actually happened. Okay, so that's basically it. Again, we're going to leave the post reference column blank for now until we learn how to post later. Right now we're not posting yet, so we'll leave it blank. Let's do the next transaction, and then I'll let you guys go ahead and get started on your own. Maybe I'll do one or two more, but the next one is going to read, perform services for $4,000 in cash on September 5th. All right, so again, another transaction that we've done before, T account method. If we were doing the T accounts for this, I would say that we're going to debit cash because we're getting cash, and that is for $4,000. So I would debit cash $4,000, and then I would credit fees income for $4,000 on the credit side. Okay, so that's how the T account analysis would look. Let's go ahead and write it in the journal. Again, very simple. We're going to write for the date, September 5th, and we're going to write the debit first. Again, writing the debit first to cash, and we're going to debit cash for $4,000. Now, when we use these placeholders here, I forgot to mention this. This is for the cents. If there were any, cents added onto the dollars, these are all whole numbers. So I'm just starting with the placeholder back this way for the thousandth place, and then the whole number, the fourth, how many thousand dollars this is. So I just count backwards, 0, 0, 0, 4. If it was for $50, I would write 0 here and then the 5 here, and work backward from this placeholder, okay? But this is going to be left for if there's any cents involved. The book makes it simple on us in these first few problems where there are no cents, just to make it easy. So leave that blank as you go. So cash, and then indent on your credit a little bit, fees, income, and it's going to be for $4,000 on the credit side. All right, and the source document on a sales. Okay, so if you sold something for cash, you would give your customer a receipt. All right, in this particular example, it doesn't list it, so I'm just going to put received cash from services, and I'm going to put receipt 1. Okay, so that'd be cash receipt 1, that we received the cash. We gave the customer we received the cash from a customer, gave them a receipt. That actual receipt of payment is their evidence and our evidence of the sale. Okay, so that's what happened on September 5th. Let me do one more here. We received cash on credit. It's basically the same transaction. I'm sorry, we performed services on credit. So again, we're going to have fees income as the credit, and that would be for $2,950. And then we're going to use accounts receivable, $2,950 on the debit side. Okay, and So let's go ahead and do this. So we have this happening on September 9th, I believe. Let me just double check that. Yeah, I'm sorry, September 6th, my fault, September 6th. And so we're going to go accounts, receivable, and then we're going to go fees income with the indent. And that was for $2,950. And then services on account. And then I would say, in this particular example here, I would we would go receipt 2. Again, we didn't receive. I'm sorry, we would not go receipt 2 here. We would simply list the terms of the account. So as we haven't done this yet, but we might put like N30 to 10 and 30 to list the terms of the sale. Okay, but the service and the invoice, we might put invoice number, and then it might be something like 231 would be the invoice. Okay, and so we would have a bill that would be the evidence of this, and it would have terms on it for this. So services on account is the description of the account, and then the source document would be the bill that we are going to sell. And remember, we didn't receive cash, so we can't use a receipt, so that's why I crossed that out. But it would be invoice number, sales invoice number 231. Okay, so there's a couple transactions for you to view. We're on 12 minutes, going on 12 minutes here now, so I'm going to let you guys do the rest of problem 41A using these rules. Again, leaving the post reference column blank, because we're going to only use that when we post. All right, so again, there's the first few transactions. Again, remember, as you go, date first, then the debit, then the number, then the indent, then the credit, and then the credit number, and then your short description with the source document. Now, in the first transactions here, the book does not give you source documents, so when you list the description, I'm okay with you just saying paid cash for rent, or paid rent, and then received cash from sales. Just basically summarize what the transaction was as best you can, so that if you were looking back at this, you would know exactly what you did in the transaction. Okay, so again, this is just a tutorial for you guys to use as I'm gone, and hopefully you guys can complete problems 41A successfully, and we'll go over that once I get back into class. Thank you.